Right now, I'm standing on a hill surrounded by 4 rivers that have been keeping people dry since 800 AD. I'm Veronica Lewis, and today on Let's Go Dutch, we're in Zwolle.
I'm gonna travel the world. I'm gonna go where the Dutch have been, and I'm gonna share it with you, my friends. Let's go Dutch. Let's go Dutch. Let's go Dutch.
We'll explore an ancient city that grew wealthy as a member of the Hanseatic League.
So put on your clogs and let's go Dutch.
Zwolle is the capital of the Overijssel province. It's surrounded by 4 rivers, the IJssel, the Vecht, the A, and the Zwarte. The name Zwolle has its roots in hill. As the rivers were prone to flooding, this little hill was the only high ground to build on. The name Zwolle has its roots in the swelling of the ground to form a hill.
(800 AD) is the first official settling of the area. In the year 1230, the Bishop of Utrecht granted city rights. This medieval town joined the Hanseatic League a little later on in 1294. We'll talk more about that, but for now, let's go see what Veronica's found.
Most medieval towns were surrounded by walls. Some towns still have them, although most are gone. Some also have a city gate or two still surviving. Here in Zwolle, it's the Sassenpoort, dating back to 1409.
The Sassenpoort, which means Saxon Gate, earned its bell tower in 1732, and the port itself has earned a spot on the UNESCO World Heritage List. It was designed as a defensive tower, complete with vantage points for pouring boiling pitch down on enemies. Yikes! In the 17th century, the Sassenpoort was used as a prison. Now a protected monument, the port is open for visitors to explore this medieval structure.
Before we go on, I think a woord van dag is in order. Our word of the day is stadsmuur. Stadsmuur. It means city wall, and Zwolle still has a portion left. The stadsmuur once completely encircled the medieval city.
Surrounded by a moat and protected by 23 towers, Zwolle was quite a fortified town. Standing next to the Stadsmuur is the Pelzertoren.
This tower was called Fortress Tower on a map from 1832. The locals simply referred to it as the tower at the Pelzerpoort. That's all that's left of the Pelzerpoort. It was one of the gates into the medieval city. Let's talk about the Hanzastad, which Zwolle is known as.
Hanzastad means Hanseatic City. Zwolle, along with several other towns in Overijssel, joined the Hanseatic League. In the Middle Ages, merchant traders from all over Northern Europe plied the rivers. There was no organized law, and disputes which broke out regularly had no centralized way of resolving them. The Hanseatic League was formed by Northern Germanic merchants in order to end the fierce competition and fighting with one another. While not a single company or corporation, the League was a pact amongst individual merchants to work together.
While Amsterdam had its golden age in the 17th century, the golden age of Zwolle was in the 16th century. The medieval centrum is packed with monuments from Zwolle's Hanseatic past. In the heart of the old town sits the Grote Markt, the big market, always bustling with activity. There is still a weekly market held here. The Grote Markt sits right on the edge of the Grote Kerkplein, the square around the big church. Dedicated to the Archangel Michael, the St. Michael or Grote Kerk was built between 1406 and 1466 in Lower Rhine Gothic style. Originally, the church had a bell tower taller than the Domtoren in Utrecht, but a century worth of lightning strikes caused the tower to collapse in 1682. Next to the kerk is this cute little Renaissance house from 1614, now a cafe. This was the Hofwacht, translating to head watch. This was the Civic Guards post. Now known as the Academiehuis Grote Kerk, the church features art exhibits and music performances. At the time of filming, the magnificent Sneaker organ from 1721 was under restoration. Known as a rood screen and dating back to 1597, this was donated by the Savossa Gills. There is much to admire in the detailed craftsmanship. Interesting enough, this clock was to tell the minister his sermon was going too long. St. Michael's sword strikes the bell when the allotted 1 hour is up. Amongst the Golden Age elite buried in the kerk are Aleda Greven, who founded the Vrouwenhuis, and painter Gerard Terborch. Sitting across from the Grote Kerk is the Stadhuis.
We've seen various styles of stadhuizen in the Dutch towns. This one, going back to 1450, is quite different. Originally, it was the Schepenzaal, the ship's hall.
The original Stadhuis was Gothic, but was rebuilt in 1821. The Schepenzaal served as town hall, the court, and occasionally the leaders from around Overijssel gathered here. These portraits of nobles from the House of Orange were painted in 1766 on the occasion of a visit from the stadtholder, Willem V. Today, the Schepenzaal is used for weddings, where the bride and groom get married under the watchful eye of the House of Oranje.
this would be a good time for our word of the day. Our
Wait. We already did a woord van dag. Stadsmuur.
Stadsmuur, city wall. Ugh. You know, why can't we have a second word of the day?
We can't do that. That's never been done before. No one's ever heard of such a thing. Okay.
Our second woord van dag is blauwvingers. Blauw means blue, and vingers means fingers. Blauwvingers, that's what the locals are known as. There's a story in there. Willem, alstublieft.
Way back in 1682, when the Grote Kerk bell tower collapsed, the town didn't have the geld to rebuild. To raise money, they sold their bells to the town of Kampen. Well, it turns out the bells were damaged and wouldn't play. So to get even, Kampen paid for them with copper coins. Knowing they sold damaged bells and not trusting Kampen, the money was counted and recounted. The copper turned their fingers blue.
And thus they became known as blauwvingers.
Interesting tower piercing the Zwolle skyline is the Peperbos-toren. It was built between 1463 and 1484 as part of the Onze Lieve Vrouw Basiliek. The original top from 1727 burned down in 1815, and the current dome top was added in 1828. Its shape is what gave the tower its name, Pepper Pot. Built in late Gothic style, construction started in 1394. It is part of the parish of Thomas à Kempis, who was a canon regular. Born in 1380, he became sub-prior of the St. Agnes Monastery near Zwolle in 1429. He wrote The Imitation of Christ between 1420 and 1427. The Onze Lieve Vrouw Basiliek holds the Thomas à Kempis Shrine. The massive pipes breathe life into the organ from 1896. The family who paid for the organ had their family coat of arms on top of the pipes.
I'm sure you've heard me say it many times before, but these old cities are themselves an open-air museum. Get out and explore the nooks and crannies. You never know what you might come across.
The beauty of wandering around is that you find hidden gems, like this little courtyard called the Hof van Zutphen. It was founded by a knight in 1350. Here's an interesting house from 1464. This is the Huis met de Hoofden, the house with the heads.
You would be correct in thinking something out of a Vincent Price movie. Except there's no heads.
In Amsterdam, there is also a Huis met de Hoofden, only that gable has various busts on the facade.
Ja, that house met de Hoofden is quite headly indeed. And yet this house met de Hoofden has none. This gable design was popular amongst the German Hanseatic towns. Zwolle prospered as a member of the Hanseatic League. The Dutch East India Company, which ushered in Holland's golden age, wasn't formed until 1602. The Hanseatic League, however, was formed around the 13th century. Instead of competition, it was cooperation as well as mutual protection.
Now, speaking of protection, another fine house that's a protected Rijksmonument is the Karel de Vijfde House.
Oh yeah, a fine Renaissance gable. This house was built in 1571. It gets the name Karel de Vijfde House from a medallion up on the facade with an image of Charles V. Born in Ghent, Charles was the 15th century Spanish Habsburg king who ruled over the Low Countries. His fanatical son, the Spanish King Philip II, caused the Dutch provinces to wage the 80 Years' War for independence from Spain. The family that owned the house were very influential through the centuries. They placed the medallion on the facade, giving the house its name.
I also want to mention that during World War II, the Dutch resistance used this house to send couriers. They also printed up an underground newspaper. In 1680, Peter Zoury was the mayor of Zwolle, and he had that house built.
Known as the Frauenhaus, it was later owned by the very wealthy Aleida Greven. When she died in 1742, she decreed that her house become a home for elderly women. The house has a museum on the first floor that's worth a peek. In the 11th century, the Grote Aa River led up to the Waag. Later on, the Dutch built over the river, and the new street, the Melkmarkt, was created. In the 1600s, stately homes started popping up, with the grandest being the Drosten House, now home to the Stedelijk Museum. In 1551, this house was the Drosten House, which takes its name from the owner, Engelbert van Ense. Engelbert was the Drost van Drenthe, the bailiff of nearby Drenthe province. He had the biggest house in the area back in 1628. The house is in late Gothic style, with some Rococo added in 1760.
Checking out that house. In 1617, Golden Age painter Gerard de Borch was born in that house. The facade was renovated in 1875.
There's another surviving tower. That one is the Veendragerstoren, built between 1475 and 1500. Veendragers were wine transporters, and perhaps one can get a glass of wine there. being that there is now a cafe inside.
Remember that story about the locals being known as Blauwfingers? This building behind me is the Vitelleo. It was a brewery back in 1666. It gets its name from the white lion, or Vitelleo, up on the facade. The blue ball under his paw is a nod to Blauwfingers.
Anyone with a sweet tooth will want to stop in at the Savosa Balacha's house. These are a special candy made in the basement since 1845. And in fact, this is the only place you can get them. Let's go see what they are.
Stepping inside is like a trip back in time, as the Balacha's house looks the same as it did back in 1845. While these little delights come in many flavors now, the original candy made from cane sugar was black and used to sweeten coffee and tea.
I love wandering through quaint, picturesque towns, and Zwolle didn't disappoint. The city grew rich during the Hanseatic period. Today, it's rich in history. Well, that's all the time we have. Join us again next time on Let's Go Dutch as we explore more of Holland and beyond. Tot ziens!